Thanks.
So moving on to task 3, we are focused on the relocation destination. And so just a re-highlight of our site suitability. So we did find that El Paso is the best site to have a more permanent location for some relocation in the West Texas, New Mexico area. So we focused on some population density, where the current food deserts are located, because we want to be able to serve those underprivileged areas, as well as proximity to the current water waste management plants, proximity to underground aquifers, and then distance from flash flooding events to understand where we need to retrofit those arroyos. So then we did some more in-depth study on our prototype location suitability. So did a whole bunch of work with the site's soil study. And so with our 3 different systems, our blue system is our algae biofuel system. And so we looked at where sewage can be treated, where there's current riparian zones, and where kind of some of those pond reservoirs could be located. And so that kind of shows us that more internal locations where that green is on the very top, kind of towards the outsides of our site location, could be the best suited for our blue systems. Moving on to our green systems, our butterfly habitat, we looked at where paths and trails could be, food sources for wildlife, and then the current plant species. And so that kind of showed us that kind of those outside corners could be the best locations, which is also great because that means our human systems can be on the internal side, and then our kind of more naturalized can be on the outside. So moving on to our human systems, we have our community center biodomes, and that actually had a lot of a lack of limitation. And so we were able to, anywhere where it was all green would be suitable for some pretty intense but naturalized building processes for these urban centers. So then just to re-highlight our prototypes, we had this relocated community biodome that is in the shape of an agave to be able to kind of pay homage to what the current habitat looks like. This will be where people are able to go for school, medication, groceries, etc. We also have our geomagnetic beaconing, which will be able to guide the internal system of the butterflies to be a safe location for their overwintering sites. And then our algae biofuel system, which will create fresh, clean water that is usable for crop production from our sewage waste systems.
Okay, so for our site plan, just to reiterate, this is the space that's mainly focused on how the people will live and how we will rebuild community following mass migration to safer areas from climate disaster. And so the primary interventions in these will incorporate the developing the human centers that rely on more sustainable modes of transportation like high-speed rails and slow magnetic rail, as well as communities within reasonable walking distance to every human resource center. We also aim to create cultivated cropland to accommodate for food deserts and increase population. And they will also serve as critical flyover land for the monarchs. And we will also have land bridges that allow for the geomagnetic beacons to sit on top of to kind of guide the monarch migration. And next slide. Okay, so this first section shows the long cut through some of the most important aspects of our relocation site. It shows a representation and the geographical relationships between these areas. From the left to right, you can see that there's a internal slow mag rail and autonomous vehicle lanes, which are also accompanied by bike lanes and a park that consists of native vegetation. Then moving on, it shows the housing and biodome and how some will utilize the space and interact with it. And then moving on to the right side is the section that demonstrates the cropland and field rainwater catchment, as well as alternative energy corridors that are coupled with the algae biofuel farms. Next slide. Okay, so this section shows a closer and more detailed look into the biodome human centers. These biodomes will contain the essential human infrastructure needed by each of these individual residential communities. They will contain healthcare facilities, shopping, schools, groceries, etc. And the shape of these domes will allow for rainwater catchment that will help serve the entire community. And then the housing is made out of natural earth materials, which can improve the microclimate in this area and serve as protection from solar radiation. And then the terracing will also allow for natural drainage, which the runoff will go into the croplands and increase natural infiltration. And this section shows the land bridge with the geomagnetic beacons. These will serve to simulate the geomagnetic field in the event that it was destroyed by polar reversal. This will greatly help migratory species that rely on this field for their migration and help direct them along the detour routes. And it will also serve as roost sites or potential overwintering locations with the Franklin Mountains in close proximity.
So we also wanted to create a kind of a public space where people are able to see the algae biofield process play out. So we created kind of a natural space where people are able to kind of walk through it. We had some case studies that gave us some inspiration, but this system created kind of a ponding level system. And so as you move farther down the system, the water becomes more clean, there becomes less algae, and by the end of the process, the water should be clean and usable for our cropland. So this will need to be in proximity to our current population zones, but far enough away that the sewage can be open air, but also to be remediated into usable water. And then lastly, we have our phasing plan. So just following task 1 and task 2, we have our timeline for our human systems, which goes from our building of our kind of earthen centers all the way up to our geomagnetic beacons. For our energy, we go from wind into our algae biofuel into a combination from 2025, 2050, and 2100. And then our phasing strategy is the same as the other 3 tasks, and our performance is able to increase our grain systems by almost 18,000 acres. Our green energy corridor is increased by about 8,000 acres, and then our rainwater collection is increased by about 7,000 acres. And then our protection and resiliency is just creating the land bridges that will eventually create these migratory species, and then we'll transition into the geomagnetic beacons. Thank you.